Welcome to Hey Sister. This is episode 46. She knows the drill. Hey sister.
Hey sister.
Join me, Courtney Lewis,
And me, Carly Ferguson,
in our conversational podcast about everyday situations.
You can count on us to tell it to you straight with our own sisterly spin.
Consider this a phone call with your own Southern sisters as we discuss with you personal accountability, healthy relationships, managing responsibilities, and contributing to society.
Each episode will consist of straight talk and a call to action.
Your sisters are calling.
Thanks for answering.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Hey Sister. This is Courtney, and my sister Carly and I are so glad y'all are answering our sisterly call this week. Today's episode is another wonderful class during our back to school series for adults. We have really enjoyed learning some of the core and elective classes we took as youth, like science, band, math, and PE, but as they really play out in the life of a mom, as gardening, music, budgeting, and physical fitness. Today we are excited to continue our back to school series as we attend shop class. And I have to add, happy Labor Day, sisters. You could say today's rollout date of shop on Labor Day is serendipitous, so maybe you can find a little extra time in your day to labor and bite off a project you've been thinking about, large or small. With that said, Carly, will you introduce our sisters to today's awesome guest expert?
Gladly. I met Adriana López some months back at an Uplift networking event here in Waco. In fact, when initially asking her to be on the podcast, I recalled how I was the girl by the charcuterie board. You can see where my priorities were that evening. But yes, in striking up a conversation then, I knew it would be wonderful to continue hearing her point of view as a creative maker on Instagram. Adriana is known on Instagram as Texas DIY Mama, where she blesses the lives and feeds of tens of thousands of women with her DIY know-how and helpful tips to help develop and instill confidence to start a project, use a power tool, and save money. Her content is so inspiring and chock full of instruction. So I'm grateful she's here as our woodshop teacher, per se, to talk some shop with our sisterhood. With that, Adriana, welcome to Hey Sister.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you.
So, Adriana, I did not have the pleasure of meeting you at this networking event Carly was talking about, and I would love to learn a little bit more about you. So could you tell our sisterhood a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I am the content creator over at Texas DIY Mama. I am a DIYer / woodworker. I am also a mom. And I say I'm a retired RN because when I had my second baby, I decided to stay home to raise my family. So I was an RN and now I stay home, and I'm originally from Mexico. I immigrated when I was really, really young. I've lived in Texas for about 9 years. So this is like home for me now.
When did you start Texas DIY Mama?
I actually started it right around the pandemic because, there was a lot of stuff to do at home and I wasn't really going anywhere. My kids weren't in school or anything, and I was home. And there was always things, I've always fixed things around my house ever since I was young. And so I've always liked tools. I actually was DIYing a little bit before. I just wasn't sharing it. And then I started sharing on my personal Instagram. But my personal Instagram, because our families live on opposite ends of the country, I usually like using my personal Instagram to share about my family, like my kids and whatnot, because we don't travel very often, especially with young kids. And so when I started posting my DIY on my regular Instagram, I felt like, oh no, this is taking over. And I didn't want it to cloud my feed where I was sharing stuff about my family. So then out of the blue, I said, you know what if I just start an Instagram and I'll just share once a week or whatever. I never had the intention of becoming a content creator and doing any of this, having all these followers or whatever. I was just like, I'm just going to post pictures. I didn't know anything. I would just post a picture because I was like, oh, look, hey, this is what I did. Look. And so then around that time, I feel like there's a lot of women who actually started to do DIY. I had no idea that this huge community of DIYers existed. As I started posting, I started networking with different women, other moms that were doing it. And then I started learning all about content creation and DIYing. So yeah, I started in June of 2020. That's when I started my account.
Wow. What a time to take on a task like that, especially because during that time, if I recall correctly, lumber prices were on the rise. Trying to get contractors was a difficult thing. So that's a really cool time for you to take it on too, because it's like, you know what? People can't come into my house. There's a pandemic. And also, if I could get somebody, they're strapped for time because everybody else wants to take on all the home projects right now, but didn't have the know-how. So how cool that you got started then, because I feel like there definitely was a huge need for that.
Oh, yeah. For sure. I mean, it was crazy. I remember I was working on my mudroom and I wanted to switch out the countertop. I wanted to add a granite top. And I remember that was like one of the only things that was open around that time. All the Home Depots, all the construction stuff, that was one of the only things that remained open during the pandemic. So I remember like going to this marble place and asking them, I'm just looking for like a small piece. And their lead time was weeks. I was like, oh, okay. And I think that's what happened everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was so busy. And then people were still kind of unsure about going into other people's houses and whatnot. So it was definitely a really, really good time to take on projects and experiment, in your own house because you had nowhere else to go.
Well, it sounds like too, it stemmed from a desire to create or to do something. You said you liked it as a kid. So did you take shop in high school? Did you have exposure to crafts or building as a kid?
So I went to a really small Christian school, and the year that I went to high school that they offered the shop class was the year that they decided not to offer it anymore. So I was not able to take the shop class, but I grew up around a lot of uncles that were in construction. And so I'm Mexican, right? And like in our culture, it's very uncommon to see women that are using tools. And so I remember like as a little girl, I loved watching my uncles use their tools. So I would go outside and just sit there and watch them. And I remember my mom, she would tell me like, hey, come inside, let me teach you how to cook. And I would be like, but I want to sit out here. So in the end, she kind of just let me be because my sister was like really into cooking and she was younger. She's younger than me. So I think my mom felt like, okay, at least I'm teaching her. If you want to stay out there, that's fine. I think I learned how to use a power tool before I learned how to cook because I didn't learn how to cook until I was like in college. So yeah,
I'm still learning that. I don't know.
Yep.
But I did have a lot of exposure to family that was in the business. And so I learned a lot just by sitting there and watching them work with their tools. And because I come from a single parent home, one of our uncles lived with us for a little bit and he was in construction. So he had a toolbox and he had just like random tools that he had at home that he wouldn't take to work. And so if something broke around the house, like the hinge on the cabinet came loose or something, I would go into his toolbox and like, oh, I think I could use this. And so that's how I started, basically like fixing stuff. And then I was like, wow, if you have the right tool, you can pretty much do anything. So that's how I started.
That's awesome. I feel like that was pre-YouTube,
Yes.
which is how a lot of people get really motivated is by watching other people use these tools and being like,
Yes.
hey, I'm a little more confident because there's something that can help me to get this project done and through the hoop. So
Yes.
that's really cool. And it's really awesome that you just gravitated towards that because it does take that creativity and that desire to do it. And when you said you found these other creators and DIYers, it's probably really cool to talk because you're like-minded in a way. You're kind of inspired by the challenge and thinking about it from all these different angles and going back and forth. So that's really, really fun. And I love watching your videos and I like the lives that you've been doing recently too, talking to others in the space. So it's really wonderful that you're sharing that knowledge with people and with our sisters today.
Speaking of sharing things with sisters today, I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about shop in our daily life now. I know you've just talked a little bit about your exposure to what could have been considered like shop class, learning at the feet of your uncles and avoiding cooking with your mom. No kidding, just kidding. Just kidding. I think we all get that a little bit. Like it's always funny how when cleanup time would come for dinner, it'd be like, this is the time I want to practice piano. Yeah, like you find those ways to sidestep. But you're here as our shop teacher, Adriana. What could you teach our sisterhood today about shop class? Teach us one great lesson.
Okay, so a drill is your best friend. I have used a drill for all sorts of stuff. Yes, it's a good tool if you're trying to hang something on the wall and whatnot, but nowadays, like there are so many different kinds of attachments that you can use with a drill. Like I have attachments that help me scrub the floor. Like anytime, we go outside during the season, we're changing out the flowers and whatnot. We have what they call an auger, which is basically a bigger drill bit or whatever. You just hook that onto the drill and it's easier than digging with a little shovel. So I definitely think for anybody, everybody should own a drill because it's so diverse and you can use it for more than just building.
That's awesome. And Courtney and I do know what an auger is because we
Yes.
have to do a shout out to our mama, our Texas mama.
Our Texas DIY mama.
She has instilled in us the DIY attitude because she would do a lot of things and she used an auger for our flower beds outside. And so it was really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she was doing that. I mean, gosh, that was 20 years ago. She would use an auger bit and it was hysterical because I remember she served for a long time in our young women's organization through our church. And we did fundraisers for going to girls' camps. And so we did planting in other people's flower beds as our fundraiser. And mom would show up with her drill to like drill into people's gardens.
She's like, oh, let's do this the fast way. Let's be efficient. Come on. And she just go and like be whipping through it.
Yeah, because we'd have 15 girls show up and 2 flats of flowers that they'd paid $30 to have planted.
Yes.
My mom was like, we can be in and out in less than 5 minutes. Like, she just takes a drill.
Well, I love that, Adriana, because it's like when you know your tools, you're going to be more likely to use it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, when I got married, my husband knew that I liked tools and whatnot. But then when we bought our house and then I started getting more into like the DIY stuff because it's my house, we used to pay someone to plant our flowers. But his dad is really into gardening and his dad lives out in Florida. And so he flew in once and he was like, oh, hey, I'm going to help you guys do your flowers. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I told my husband, I was like, hey, when you go get the flowers, go buy this thing called an auger and you can just whip through that really quick. And he was like, what? And my father-in-law was like, whoa, what is this? So for Christmas, the next Christmas, we bought my father-in-law a drill and an auger. And that's what he uses now.
You rocked his world, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, Adriana, are there any mottos or sayings you live by or preach in regards to the power of working with wood?
Yes, I always say that beautiful takes time. And one of the things that fulfills me about doing, especially when I get more into the woodworking stuff, I'm reminded that Jesus was a carpenter. And so one of the things that I love about woodworking is a lot of times I go to the lumber yard and look for what they call the cutoffs, which are basically like the extra pieces off of a bigger piece that they used for a project. And now they're just these like little scraps that they sell. And I love using those to make epoxy charcuterie boards. And so it's really amazing. Like one of the processes that I love about that is you take this piece of like scrap wood and you run it through your tools, you mill it up and whatnot. And then the end result is like this beautiful piece of lumber that makes up this charcuterie board. And it always reminds me like, this is how God works on us. We see us because we're human. We don't always see the potential in someone, but God does. And he takes whatever we think is a piece of scrap, he mills us up, he makes us pretty, and then we're like this beautiful creation. And that's one of the things that I love about doing all of this, is that it's like a huge before and after.
I love that. It's very profound. And I love that that really makes the process more meaningful because as you get into projects, sometimes it's just really daunting and you're looking at the clock and saying, this is taking way too long. You want to throw your hands up and get really tired of it because it's not perfect yet. And there are so many steps. And so to think about it, especially in the perspective and the spiritual perspective, that God is the master carpenter, that he is working with us. And that as we work on this, it can be a very fulfilling experience. And so letting that experience be that length of time in order to achieve the beauty. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
I really love that too. I mean, I love the spiritual aspect of it, but I also love that quote, that beautiful takes time, because that helps settle this internal battle that I feel like I've had over the past 10 years, which is I grew up with the quote from our mom that Carly can probably finish, but it's that any job worth doing is worth doing right. And so our mom used to say that all the time about any project we're doing. And as an adult, I remember actually one of my first real jobs out of college, my boss said to me, done is better than perfect. And so I feel like those two mottos were at odds with each other. Done is better than perfect versus any job worth doing is worth doing right. And that's really hard when you live in this world that, like Carly's saying, like the clock is ticking. I don't have time to be investing in this project. Done is better than perfect. But at the same time, any job worth doing is worth doing right. You're caught in this middle ground of, should I try and make this perfect? Should I try and make this beautiful? But I like what you're saying is beautiful takes time. So if you want it to be beautiful, invest the time. But if you don't really care that it's beautiful, then yeah, sure, done is better than perfect. But if you want that beautiful end result, beautiful takes time. I love that.
And I love that it's like you add that value, because in looking through the pictures and the things that you post, it's inspiring because I could look around and see a lot of projects that I could get my hands on. And if you're thinking about that beautiful and what does that mean? It means you're adding value to that thing.
Yes.
Changing out the hardware on your cabinets.
Yes.
You get to have the pride at the end to be able to say that you did that and appreciating it. So it helps you to kind of get over this perfectionist tendency that we all have, I think, within us in a way. So that's really good to keep in mind.
Yeah. And also one thing I didn't mention is I'm an autism mom. So my son is on the spectrum. He's 6 years old. And I think through woodworking, especially, not only like is it a creative outlet for me, but it's helped me remember that God's timing is not mine. And so going through that journey of being an autism mom and like all the unknowns and all the fears of, is he going to be able to do this? Is his speech ever going to improve? I'm reminded every time I'm working on a piece, like, it's okay. Beautiful takes time. In the end, I think he's a beautiful child. But with time, I know that God is working on him to make him even more beautiful.
That's absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. One thing that I've noticed that you've said on your Instagram, speaking of taking these bits and pieces and making things beautiful, I noticed you did a project a while back that was making a stool out of scrap wood for your kids' pre-K or kindergarten class.
Yeah.
And to see the process of you making that and the lessons that you learned in that process. And I just want to actually quote from some of the lessons that you learned in that I think are really applicable to this beautiful takes time process. 1, don't DIY when you're exhausted. 2, always make pocket holes first, which I love, by the way. Speaking of DIY stuff, I love learning terminology from you. Like when you use words like pocket holes or jig or a pilot hole, when you're like using these terms, I'm like, oh, note to self, I'm learning these things. So I feel like you have all those great lessons. So anyway, you said always make pocket holes first. 3, and this is my favorite, learn to laugh at your mistakes. There is nothing in DIY that can't be fixed. Because I think with any project you do, you learn those lessons as you go. You're like, oh dear, I just did the holes in the wrong place. And I've done that so many times myself. And I don't think I'm a DIYer. I'm more of a like barely fix it up, or what's the tiniest amount of work I could do to flip this or make it functional. But I think there's a lot to be said for mistakes will be made. And with DIY, you can fix it. And it's hard not to get too mad at yourself and be like, why did I even take this on? So I love that beautiful takes time. And if in that process, in that time, you're making mistakes, it's okay. You've got wood filler.
Yes, that's right.
I think too, it's really good to like share our successes or the stories that we have with making things or doing things with other people, because it's another way to get positive feedback about where we're at or get an idea on something. So it's really helpful to have accounts like yours to see and learn new terminology and say, okay, and kind of get you out of maybe a little writer's block. So it's really good to have that kind of content to be able to reference and say, okay, like Adriana's doing it. I can get out there and tackle my thing. So Adriana, each week we have what's called a call to action for our sisters. And that's just something that we can do that week that we can learn and apply. Do you have something to share with our sisters?
Yes. So I challenge all our sisters for this week, go find your drill and go learn how to do one thing with it, whether it's screwing, putting a screw into something, or drilling a hole in the wall to hang something, but learn how to use that drill because it will change your life. You will not have to rely on anyone to hang a picture for you that's been sitting on the floor there for months. So yes, go learn how to use that drill.
Whoop, whoop.
I love it. And also when you go to hang that picture that's been sitting there for months, go watch Adriana's tips on how to hang pictures. Your blue tape trick. That trick is a lifesaver. I don't want to try and explain it on airwaves because it's too hard to imagine.
Yeah, we'll link it.
We'll link it in the show notes.
And also, we should link in the show notes her favorite drill because I know for some of us, we can get into that analysis paralysis like we've mentioned before. And so it's kind of nice to know what already works for someone else.
Yes. So we'll be sure to link to Adriana's tips for mounting artwork on walls, especially if you've got two hooks on the back of a frame or something or on a mirror. She's got this really cool tip that involves painter's tape that you will just love. And you'll think, why didn't I know this my whole life? In fact, when I told it to my husband, I was in the front yard, we were pulling weeds and I had to act out with my arms. Like, you just put tape on the back, and I'm miming how you put tape on. And he got it though. And he was thinking, this is amazing. That's awesome. What a cool guest. This is great news. So I think he's really excited and he's thinking, why don't we have anything to hang anymore though? I can't use that now. We've got all our art hung, but
I'm surprised he didn't say work and talk. Like we heard all our life.
Work and talk. Work and talk. That's a mom quote. Yeah. If my husband said that to me, I don't know that he would.
Oh yeah. We would respond a little differently, I guess, if our spouse said something like that.
Work and talk and be like, come again?
Excuse me?
I would be curious to know, I know that was your call to action for us, Adriana, but what other inspiring tidbits do you have for our sisterhood before you leave us today, as far as personal experiences that you've had, other lessons that you've learned in regards to the power of working with wood, like your most favorite or your most difficult project?
So my most favorite project is always the project I just worked on. I think because of the amount of time, and I feel like I put so much love into my projects because it's usually for my home, or even if I like do something in woodworking, if I'm making a cutting board or a charcuterie board, it's usually for someone. I have sold one cutting board in my life. All the rest of them, I've given them away. So there's lots of love that goes into that. And I think one of the questions that I commonly get asked is, how do you get started? They see like my tools and they're like, wow, how did you get all those tools? And my advice for anybody who's interested, you don't have to become a full-time DIYer, but if you're interested in just learning how to do something in regards to DIY, just give it a try. Just get started. I always tell people start small, because when you start small, your skill set grows with every project that you do. And so don't get overwhelmed by like, oh my goodness, but I could never do that. No, you can. You can. You just have to start small. And with every project that you gain more confidence, you eventually get to a big project. And then you're building a house. So that's my advice. If you want to learn something new, start small.
Perfect. I think that's excellent advice for us to end on today. And I know you're saying the most recent project you've done is your favorite, but I have to say I've seen your most recent project, your wet bar, and that really is like a favorite project for me of your stuff that I've seen. I mean, it is remarkable. You definitely know what you're talking about, and we're very glad that you joined us today. So, Adriana, where can our sisterhood find you?
I am on Instagram at Texas DIY Mama, and I also am on Pinterest, same tag at Texas DIY Mama.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for joining us today. As a reminder to all of our sisterhood, any episodes or resources that we've referenced in today's episode will be linked in our show notes along with a minute marker timeline. This will also include the links to Adriana's favorite drill and the videos that we've talked about that are some of our favorites from Adriana's Texas DIY Mama account. We encourage you to join our online conversations this week about this episode on Instagram at the Hey Sister Podcast or at facebook.com/Hey Sister Podcast. We want to hear how you're doing on this call to action this week or any ahas you had during today's episode. Reminder, what's the call to action? Use your drill this week, sisters. We also invite you to share a link to today's episode to anyone in your life you think could use a little bit of shop motivation. Thank you so much to our new favorite shop teacher, Mrs. Adriana López. And sisters, thanks as always for answering our call today. We look forward to talking to y'all next week as we continue with our back to school series. Have a great week, sisters. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Carly's typing as we're. Hold on. Why are you typing in my notes as I'm reading? Don't do that to me. Carly's like adding to the notes. Oh, thank you. Use. It's like coming in like slow motion. Use your drill.
I'm trying to help you.
I know.
You're calling me out.
Sorry, I'm just seeing like text pop up.
I was editing the call to action so you can read it.
Okay.